Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hunting for Silver Linings. Today is Thursday, March 4. I'm here in the Great Lakes region of the U.S., in a cute little town called Grand Rapids, Michigan, situated directly between Chicago and Detroit, hours away from Toronto. We have Yorgo joining us from Oklahoma City, and our special guest tonight, we have Aaron Chavez, who's situated down there in Miami, Florida. Hi there, Aaron. Welcome
Hello,
to the
hello.
show. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
So we do Hunting for Silver Linings because we're really ecosystem focused, but we're also trying to introduce different players and stakeholders in the game to our global ecosystem builders. And
Yeah.
so this is to learn a little bit about you, what you're doing in your ecosystem and for your ecosystem. You have a great history, and now you sit with a bunch of different roles, whether it's mentoring or actually working within organizations. Really helping to move the organizations forward. Of course, you have a fiduciary responsibility, et cetera. But we'll get into all that. So why don't you get us acclimated to you and who you are and why you are? Like, where'd you come from?
Sure. Yeah, I'll give you the basics. So I was born in Arizona, and the short of it, I was born a poor Hispanic kid. Right. That's the simplest, easiest way to think about it. Just somebody who was normal, somebody who didn't really know what was going on, somebody who was just growing up. And as life went on and I started to kind of let my interests pull me and started getting involved in organizations, I kind of fell into the world of finance because I liked that it was money related, but it was also productive. You were doing something. There were things that were moving. I liked that there was that momentum around it. And I think that's kind of what stayed consistent throughout the journey. But it was really kind of carrying that momentum forward that led me eventually to Arizona State University, WP Carey School of Business, and then eventually I landed in Manhattan working for Barclays on Wall Street. So that was a very defining time, both in terms of the people that I worked with, the hours that I worked, the industries that I covered, and all that kind of good stuff. And what it did is it created a nice base so that eventually when I looked at my options and looked at kind of what the future held and the options kind of therein lie, I decided to, change things up. I wanted to bring a Wall Street to Main Street. I wanted to do the things that we do for people that are, incredible people and companies that are incredibly wealthy, and see if we could bring that to the early stage and make a difference, just basically kind of be that jet fuel for the early market. And that hypothesis was, tested. I moved down to Miami, an early stage ecosystem. I knew my partner, I knew his fiance, I knew a few different people, but really starting at the ground up. So it's funny, I've seen, the wonderful world of high level finance. And I've also been the nobody in the room in a totally foreign ecosystem, building a company from the ground up. So I count myself fortunate to, have seen both sides. And, over the time I've been involved in mentorship and organizations and helping companies, and slowly but surely you meet some interesting people. And one day I ended up here.
Sure. Well, I want to hear a little bit about, so you came from, kind of, depending on what time, kind of like I don't know, it's kind of like a meh ecosystem down there in Arizona, right? I mean,
yeah.
Like
so
Scottsdale is now fairly exciting. And then you went to New York City. All right. Now that's like ecosystem of ecosystems.
Oh yeah.
And then like you just said, you plopped yourself down in Miami. What was it? What was that experience like as you started to grow your network? Having had the experiences of both, Phoenix and then also New York. Tell us what it was like to get acclimated to like a whole new pile of folks, because Miami is fairly segmented and siloed. It's not the easiest thing to crack into, right?
Oh, for sure. And it's like every ecosystem. It has its layers, it has its players, it has its random people. And every community, whether it's Detroit, Michigan, or, Washington, D.C., or Miami, Florida, they have their momentum and they have their players and they have kind of this gravity around them that pulls different types to them, right? So seeing Arizona is kind of that mid-level mature market. If you're there, you're big. And if you're big, you're in tech. And, you have a lot of scale, and you also have a lot of, that latent wealth. There's, more millionaires in Arizona than basically anywhere else because we have that kind of environment and that kind of ecosystem where it just lends itself to that. Moving to New York, I mean, it's a melting pot in a mixer, in space. It's just everything all the time, 24/7, which was nice, but it meant that it was a community of known and unknown players. It was just too big to really kind of get my arms around. So on top of wanting to kind of get a change up and, even just be more connected to more Latin people, in the community, I decided to kind of switch it up and move to Florida, which kind of in a weird way serves as a hybrid because it has a lot of, in the last, 10 to 15 years, a lot of the scale of big companies and big enterprise. I mean, the family office world is, infinite money, and that's based here. So Florida has all this weird kind of oil in the ground. Now it's a question of who's going to refine it best and who's going to build first and who's going to be, the next or the first billion-dollar company that isn't a company that was, outside the ecosystem that kind of came in, but that was homegrown.
Mhm.
I think this ecosystem, just like others, it has its layers, it has its momentum, it has its interest. But what I like about Florida is it's probably one of the most accessible markets, meaning if you just go to a place, people are friendly. And I'll give you the perfect example. When I moved to Florida, it would surprise me and catch me off guard that people would say good morning when I got in the elevator, which when you're in New York, you don't talk to anybody. You get in the elevator and you move along with your day. So something small as, wait a minute, I have the freedom to engage with almost anybody because they'll at least engage with me. That is a huge dynamic. When you're trying to build a network and you're just trying to, engage, you can imagine how great a difference that makes in here. The one thing that I will say, which is also the negative of Florida, Florida has what I call Florida deals or Miami deals. And they're deals where they get more and more complicated over time. There's more and more players and more splits, but nobody really wants to sign anything. So the joke that I make is if I meet one more person in a tight V-neck shirt and a blazer who can't tell me how they make money, I'm going to lose it because you have to, in a meaningful way, you have to push through the people that are just talk and really find the workers. And for me, I've been fortunate to do so, but it's been, it's a journey and it's part of the churn of an early ecosystem, especially.
Have you ever been introduced to the writing of Carl Hyacin?
No, but I feel like I've heard the name before, so I'm curious.
Uh, he has some incredible insight into what you're talking about, like the how things move,
Yeah.
and he's particularly frustrated with much of it, and unabashed in his writing in opinion pieces in the press there. So he's worth looking up.
Yeah, and I think it's fair. It's a fair critique. I mean, one of the biggest critiques of early stage capital, right, is that people say they're early stage and then they want 100K in MRR. It's like, okay, well, what are you really saying to me? I mean, tell me you're the late stage of early stage and show me what you're doing. It's very much a, put your action where your mouth is type vibe that I'm very focused on.
Yeah. So I'm glad you ended up there because now the story you told us is like, okay, yeah, I swam with all the sharks and I swam well, and now I'm in Miami, and it's great, and I've built a network, and I see on your LinkedIn you're volunteering a lot of time mentoring.
Oh
So
yeah.
like were you always driven by wanting to help people and put skin in the game, or like, but what really drives you? Like, is there something consistent, or was there something that changed, something that
I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot of things, and I'll pull it into kind of a few examples. So, one of the biggest drivers I think in my life is I was in this program called the Arizona Ivy League Project, where they took a bunch of kids and wanted to basically expose them to the Ivy League. So I got in a tour bus and went to everything from Maine and saw Colby College all the way down to, Wesleyan and all colleges in New York and all the Ivies. And there was one day where I was sitting in Brown University and they had the classic, student panel of a skinny guy and an athlete, and there were a few women, and there was it was designed to kind of be the welcoming. And the
right?
funny thing was, I was sitting there and I looked across the table, and my first thought was, they don't look like Einstein, and it wasn't an insult to them, but it was very much a wait a minute. There really is much less a difference of you and me than I originally thought, and I got to see it. I
Mhm.
got to feel it. It was in front of me. And it was kind of that moment. And I can remember I was sitting there. I went, ah, there's more. I can do more because they're doing it. So why not? You know, we read stories of the come up and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, which, you know, physics and whatever, but you can do things if you really want to. So that ability and that kind of, I'm a fan of opportunity. I'm a big fan. I think it's Les Brown who says, you know, the richest place in the world, it's not the oil fields, it's the graveyard, because in there are all the untapped visions, dreams, goals, businesses, ideas from everybody that didn't. So for me, it's like, I want to put it all out there. And that's a big reason why I'm in so many mentorship programs, because I understand ecosystems are not get then give. Ecosystems are give then get. There's an energy that needs to be put in and there's momentum. And if you really care about the startup ecosystem and about building in the truest sense of what entrepreneurship is, which I would consider myself, it's like not even an entrepreneur, but I would consider myself almost an architect that happens to work with businesses because I love the process of building. And I think that because of that, when I find somebody that has an idea for a building, I can't help but want to help them. You know, it's like, oh, you have something here. Let's see it through. So the money and the consulting and the mentorship, they're tools for the end goal, which is to, you know, use a skill and ultimately, you know, push things towards the sky, whether it's poetry or businesses or whatever it might be. It's like, I just happen to be in this lens now, but I have a true respect and, you know, appreciation for the builder and the entrepreneur. So it's an honor to be in the ecosystem more than anything.
Well, that's helpful, but okay, so now I want to ask you, you brought up the idea of mediocrity.
Yeah.
So like and there's no better time now, especially, and Yorgo and I have talked about this over the last year in all of our conversations, is, you know, there's no space for mediocrity anymore.
No.
Corey, let me interrupt you for a second. My apologies for interjecting. A good friend of ours, Ross Mason, called them narcissists.
Yeah, the right idea, I'm sure.
So maybe you can, like, these folks that you're mentoring, do you have a choice? Are you placed with them? How do you communicate that there's that you're this builder and you can get them someplace, but you also don't have time to waste?
Exactly. I think part of it is the tempo of the conversation. Like, I like to build, but I'm not here to tell you how to build your company. And what that means is we're running a race and you're setting the pace. And if you happen to run slow, that's fine. But then you also can't expect me to want to run faster with you. Like, I'm going to match your pace, which is nice because clients see, like, the harder I work, hey, wait a minute, Aaron's sending more emails. It's like, yeah, because you have more things for me to act on. You're putting more bricks on the ground. I can start throwing more things at this building. So for me, I think one of the big motivators is that we're so aligned with, like, the people that, whether we work or mentor or whatever it might be, that we kind of let them either turn it into a roaring fire or fizzle out and do nothing, right? I don't want to put energy in the system where it's like, you can do it. I want to be in the energy in the system that this is how we can do it, if that makes sense, which is a big distinction. And I think that, yeah, there are so many founders, and mind you, I meet founders all the time, and some people are clearly going to win and some people are clearly going to struggle. And it's not that they're clearly going to lose, but it's a question, are they going to do the right things to mitigate the potentially mountain of problems before them, whether it's their team, their speaking ability, their personality, their idea, their MVP, whatever it might be. So mediocrity is one of those things. That the thing that I would say is nobody pays for mediocrity, which means if your startup's going to build, it has to be good, and good is great in the startup world, right? So it's one of those, mediocrity, it's fine to exist and it passes in companies, but in the companies we work with, in the companies that we help build, and the people that we work with, mediocrity is very quickly flushed from the system, or it's just not engaged with, because you don't, the phrase that pays, that I had a buddy of mine say to me once, he goes, I'm not in the business of collecting anchors. He goes, I want engines on my boat only. So the more people I can get around and the more fuel power I can put on there, the better. So
now what's how much do you subscribe to the value of increasing founders social capital?
I think it's one of those things, like, if you already have the social capital, then A, you know it, and B, you're probably already spending it. So social capital is helpful, especially if you're in the relationship game, because most founders are in the relationship game. I mean, how many people get money because they randomly throw an application at a fund? It's like what, 0.1%? It's like most people get referred, whether it's through a portfolio company or through the managing director or whatever it might be. And I think that because of that, it can create, you know, a certain wedge where if you don't have the connections or you're socially inept or socially struggling, you can find yourself on the outside of the party and, you know, it's a closed circle. But I think that that's okay because it's not like every person has to be, you know, James Bond, but you should bring a James Bond on the team if you know that you're definitely Q. Right. So in this scenario, I think it's fine to not be, you know, to recognize your own inability with it, because guess what? We're not all rocket scientists, and that's plenty okay, because we want the actual people that can do it to do it so we live. So in the same way, I think that it's okay to struggle and not know kind of where you sit in this kind of social game, but social currency spends, and it spends in terms of capital, it spends in terms of mentorship, it spends in terms of opportunity. So for me, my work is largely spent on building social capital and then spending it, whether it's for myself or others. I mean, I'm introducing clients to other clients, clients to vendors, getting people discounts, getting people funding, you know, whatever it might be. So I'm constantly, you know, Dogecoin is volatile and, you know, Bitcoin's volatile, but I'm trading currency all day long.
Sure. Yorgo?
How do you assess the zoo?
By the quality of the tamer, because I always know the zoo's going to be a zoo. I know that every startup is a bucket of bolts held together with duct tape and hope, right? I know that it looks good, but it's not. I know that you hired a graphic designer off Fiverr that makes this look like you have a $3 million in funding, and I know you really don't. Like, I can see through it, and I know how to ask the right questions about what you're doing and where you are and kind of who you are. But the things that I always look for more than anything to kind of critically assess are, one, do you either have the right team or do you know the team that you need to have? I'm okay with people not being there. I'm not okay with people not knowing where they want to go, right? Because if you don't have that to begin with, then you're spinning.
Aaron, essentially, you go back to the old principles. I mean, it's the 3,000 whatever years old. You never bet on the horse, you bet on the jockey, right?
Exactly. So for me, I kind of see it in phases where idea phase, it's all jockey. At, you know, funding phase, it's half jockey, half horse, and then beyond, it becomes ultimately you can buy new management, right? So at a certain point, it just becomes the how can you efficient this to scale. So for me, I'm always leaning into the jockey, especially just for the pure fact that I work in the early stage, you know, Series A and below market primarily. It's a jockey sport. It is a one-man sport, or, you know, one team sport where you have to bring it, you have to fight, and you have to get ready to get hit in the jaw every single day and then go out smiling again. And I think that those are resilient founders, you know, resilience, probably one of the best words for being a founder, is what actually, you know, does a lot to get a lot of the respect that I see, because I know that no matter how perfect it is, you're still going to struggle.
And of course, the next question is, okay, you have a team, but you like the jockey, the horse is average, you're looking for growth. What is your suggestion? How do we go from A to Z? And in between, of course, you're going to have all kinds of trials and tribulations. Mm-hmm. And by the way, the Z is an unknown, right? It's almost like a COVID. We all think there is a light at the end of this tunnel, and it's going to be sometime next month, and then the economy is going to grow. But nobody's thinking about October, November of 2021 and how things may be
unfold.
Right?
Yeah.
So, what you thinking here?
I think it's one of those situations where first and foremost, I need to know where the founder wants to go, right? And I've directly asked this to companies, and it's funny because I've seen the change. So there are companies that
wait mm-hmm. for a second. You're touching on something extremely important. Define where you want to be. Exactly.
A crystal clear example of this is I asked one of the companies that we're working with, I said, okay, just so I know, is this a $10 million business? or is this $100 million business? Because we can't do $10 million activities and expect to get to 100 million. So if you want to do the 100 million, you have to tell me, and then I'm going to tell you what we need to do, and then we're really going to get to work. And almost instantly, day to day, the team was different. And it wasn't that they were even doing that much different, but the air was different. I could tell their momentum, their thoughts. They went from a startup to a scale up. And I think that kind of delineation and that view is super important. The answer to your first question, which I think is, it's kind of the thing that it's so obvious, but nobody focuses on. Like, are you actually listening to your customer? Are you spending the time to actually know what they want? Because if you listen carefully, it's like life. If you listen to people long enough, they're going to tell you what they want. And your customer, if they are at least in the door, right, they're using your product. If you invest in your continuing education and of your own company on the value that you're bringing to your customer, so you can expand not just in terms of economies of scale, but economies of scope, and deliver more and bring more and engage more and get stickier and stickier, to where not only do they not want to leave, they want to refer all their friends, and they're spending 5 times as much. And it's all justified because they feel that they're getting the value that you want to provide. So for me, I have my clients lean heavy into the customer side, because I know that businesses are not mysteries. Businesses are product market fit, their operations, and their legal, ultimately, right? Do people want what you want? Can you get the team together that you need to service them? Do you have the legal protections and compliance in order to actually see tomorrow, right? And for me, it feels like if they're not starting with that customer as step one, everything else can fall away, because you're not going to have a good base to build on regardless.
Thank you. This is a wonderful summary of what we call products, people, processes, and innovation. This is what sustains competitive advantage.
I agree. And I think it's competitive advantage is to be lost. And what I mean by that is, if your customer likes you, then they like you. It doesn't matter if there's Uber and Lyft. People have allegiance to Lyft, or they have allegiance to Uber. And that's not accidental. That's because they felt listened to, recognized, understood. It's the whole BNI. People do business with people who they know, like, and trust. And if you feel like the company has an identity that you can relate to, I mean, the example of this is Apple, right? How many people buy Apple, not because they know anything about the technology, but because they feel that they're an Apple person. And that's why they spend the $2,000 on the laptop, right? And it feels like this is, part of that kind of realm.
You're touching on a very, very interesting psychological concept, which is essentially behavioral decision making.
It's Clubhouse. I mean, we're watching it play out right now at scale. They're doing the classic Netscape Google model of invite your friend, you create false scarcity, you amp it up over time, and all of a sudden you let network effects turn to node effects, and boom, it explodes. So Clubhouse, it's one of those, people think, and I'm sure they've seen it, they're like, oh, this is new and innovative, you can invite people. It's like, no, that's been a growth hack for like 20 years. They just happened to be one of the companies that was able to really execute it well and get the brand behind it to get momentum. And now it's going to be a staple, right? It's not going anywhere. It'll evolve, it'll add, but it is a testament to, behavioral decision making and, economics of demand in the startup world for sure.
So you're hitting the nail on the head, in the sense that you're talking about behavioral traits, biases. What I'm interested in is this. Let's go back to January last year. What is the difference of what you saw at the beginning of the pandemic and now? And where do we go from here in your mind? Because I'm sorry to say this, I think we're going to have several waves of going backwards and forwards to this COVID environment.
I agree. I think the biggest change that I see is there's a lot more intentionality behind the decision making of the people that I work with, whether it's intentional relationship building, intentional product testing, because there are people that are, for example, very worried of going and meeting in person. Completely fair. I have clients, though, that they need to do customer interviews on site. That's what they feel. For someone to take time out of their day and literally put their life on the line to meet with you, to have a conversation, it means that you can't just go and wander a facility. For example, we do a lot of work in the healthcare space. You can't just go wander a facility for 5 hours. You need to be in, you need to be out, you need to be careful, you need to do what you do. And that lends itself to a whole new world of are you acting in your startup or are you actually building? You know, there's a difference between playing on a construction site and actually putting bricks up, right? So in the same way, it feels like now we are so focused on just brick after brick after brick, putting it up. And I like that because it means that even if the nice thing about kind of being vague is you never know if you're screwing up or not, right? And that's where a lot of startups like to be because they don't want to have that accountability. And I get it. Of course, nobody wants to be the person that fails. But without it, you end up just circling a drain eventually. And this kind of accountability that's now present in the ecosystem way more now than ever, I think it's going to kind of separate the wheat from the chaff. You know, it's going to do the 10% cut to the bottom month on month. Startups, the startups that come now are going to be better startups. And also the day the pandemic started, and I don't mean like day one, but I mean like within the first week, one of the very first thoughts that I had was, damn, there's a bunch of people that are about to get super rich, because I know the history. I know that WeWork came out of the last pandemic. I know Twitter came out after the last pandemic. I know that there's rapid innovation and there are people around me. I mean, I happen to know somebody who I know for a fact will be worth $1 billion at some point because his product just works. And that's kind of all there is to it. And those people exist now and they're working and they're building now, especially in this COVID opportunity world that we now live in.
Well, and they also, they exist everywhere.
Yes. Yeah. They're not in any one place. It's like value and business and scale are available everywhere. It's a question of how you execute it more than anything else. It's an operations question, not a binary for me.
So I want to hear a little bit about Argent. And if you can give us the quick pitch on Argent and then get into, you mentioned healthcare. What other sectors excite you guys? It's just you and your partner. How big is your team also?
So we have a 3-person team.
Hold on.
Sure.
A couple of other things to add to what Corey said. It's fascinating that you're looking at healthcare because if anything, especially senior healthcare facilities suck.
Oh, we are innovating in that space. So I know exactly all about why they suck, and I am fixing that now.
Okay, let me know how we can help. That's it. Bye for now.
There we go. So the 10 seconds on Argent are, we want to very much kind of, how I said in the beginning, bring this Wall Street to Main Street. We focus on three major areas: business planning, financial strategy, and capital raising. So really being that interim or almost part-time co-founder within the financial role, within the strategy role, and all of that. So very high level, that's how we work. We work with B2B, B2C, B2B2C, and industries kind of across the board. For us, it's more a question of, we want to work with a bunch of people because, you know, we launched our firm about 2 years ago, but really started digging in heavily in Miami in about 14 months ago. So first things first is get exposure, meet people, see what the startup scene is like, and of course, work with who you can. And over time, what we found is that it's not a question of what we will do, it's more a question of what we won't do. So doing super deep real estate tech, or doing something, you know, incredibly pharma related where I'm just not focused, you know what I mean? But we have, for example, another person on my team that comes from a bioengineering background. So that's something more appropriate, you know, for him to cover, versus me. I like business services. I like process optimization. So two of my favorite clients, one is doing mobile phlebotomy booking for so that you can be at home, hit a button, and a mobile phlebotomist comes in, draws your blood, does your COVID testing, whatever it might be. Another one of my favorite clients is fixing the boat dockage space, because when you have a yacht, you know, these are rich people problems, but they're great problems to have. When you have a boat, you think it'd be very easy to find a place to park it. That is not necessarily true. So he has made his business as basically digitizing being a broker in a very niche arena. And you can imagine what that means between Miami and Bahamas and New York and much beyond. So for me, I love the process optimization world. I love the supply chain, the improvement world in that way. And I think that it just has so much opportunity, especially now. There's so many things. We think that we're so modern, and we realize that the 2000s were only 20 years ago, right? Like Twitter has not been around for decades. Twitter's been around for a bit, right? So there is still so much analog in such a digital world that it's about market efficiencies will eventually drive all the analog out of the market. So everything will be tappable. So it's a question of who's going to be the first to create all the taps, right? But then two, it's where does innovation go from there? Is it experiential? Is it, asset based? Is it what comes next?
Yeah, we're also
May
pretty
I
excited to
for a
see
second?
how like data is getting better, because for the last 20 years, data has just sucked.
Oh yeah, because
Like,
data's only as good as what you can do with it.
it's
People
like
don't
spitting
seem
shit
to,
out, right?
yeah.
Like early
It,
principle.
it's one of those simple things where, of course, the highest level of data, right, is prediction. So if you can predict something, if you can predict something in the healthcare space, that is risk reduction, right? That's looking after a patient. If you can predict something in the stock market, that's reducing portfolio volatility. If you can predict something in the boating market, it's setting up your supply chain to actually meet that demand, right? So I think that the need not only for data and efficient data collection, even from the early stages, but for data usage. People that can take data, especially early stage data and small amounts of data that's getting bigger and bigger by the day, and realize that, for example, this boating industry, just as a quick example, I know that there are probably 5 companies that do this, and a few of them are just not the best at it, less modern, et cetera, et cetera. So that means that this has been an information black box in terms of where people boat, where they go, and what they're doing. I'm sure that information is incredibly valuable to a lot of people that deal in the high-end arts world, that deal in the high-end car world. It's like, okay, let's have a conversation. The example that I love is it's never about who you are, it's always about where you are. And the example that was used was Ferrari, or some ultra high-end auto dealer was struggling to move cars. So what they did is they put them at an air show, because when you've been shopping for planes all day, a car, $1 million car, $500,000 car, who the hell cares? Chuck it in the back. So it's like, can you do that with your data? Can you position your data to be that valuable? It's like, that is a good data scientist. Like, that is a good analyst there.
Yorgo?
Where do we go from here? Because in more than one ways, you're talking about the fact that the way we look at data has changed. It's not longer intelligible, but at the same time, you're using AI and machine language to take care of data. Have we got enough of intelligent analysts of the analysts?
I think it's like everything, where in the gold rush, in the very beginning, it was nothing but good stuff, right? Because people were just pulling chunks out of the ground. But slowly but surely, you having to start filtering and filtering and filtering, and the market gets, so filled that there's, winners and losers, and they become harder and harder to differentiate. But I think over time, history tells all tales, right? So it's the companies that use data that prove it, that, genuinely benefit from it and turn it into an asset versus just something that they store. Because a lot of people just say big data, and it's like, okay, give me one use case for your data. Give me one buyer of your data. And if you just say healthcare, that's not helpful, right? That doesn't say anything to anybody in particular. And it's the phrase that I like is, companies are very rarely bought. They are very often sold, which means nobody's out there hunting for what you have. You have to bring it to them. And if you don't have that use case in mind, just like starting your startup in the first place, how do you expect that some art dealer who would love to know where everybody who has above a 50-foot yacht happens to shop in Miami, you have to hunt for that person, right? They're not going to find you unless, serendipity pulls you that way. In terms of where we go from here, I think the startup world, like kind of all niche communities, gets smaller and smaller by the day. And I think we start seeing the trend that I've seen in VC and PE and all these is a more connected fund. People are pushing further and further into connecting with their ecosystem, whether it's building accelerators, incubators, community focus groups, hosting a lot of events on Zoom, because they know that the world's becoming flatter and capital's becoming more available. And it's one of those things. I'm a Rockefeller fan, not because of the empire, but because of the strategy, right? How many funds and PE funds and VC funds do we see that are $1 billion, right? It's like, well, in order for them to get a return, they have to be just investing in blue chip after unicorn after dragon, over and over and over. But If you do the Rockefeller model, which was forced on him, where you split all his company into you take one thing that owns 100, and that's not good. So you split it into 10 things that own 10, but now there are only 10 things that own 10. So let's let each of the 10 things own 12. So now you've just added 20 to the whole pile because now it's differentiated. How many funds would benefit from taking $1 billion fund, turning it into $100 million funds, and then digging into unfocused, uneducated communities where there is value to be unlocked? That is where I think there's so much opportunity in the world, because it's easy to take something from 1 million to 50 million, and you could get a great return. I would rather make that bet 10 times than make one bet that WeWork's not going to blow up. Personally. But to be fair, and it's no disrespect to, the founders and all that stuff, but the second I heard of WeWork, I knew it was going to blow up. Like the moment I heard of it, because people said WeWork startup, and I'm like, WeWork bad real estate. Yeah. That's all that is.
When Corey asked you about social capital, he was actually referring to a few things that you have discussed in your answers and in your, essentially your points that you're raising. The biggest one of these points, and the most substantial one, is this. Are we about to reform capitalism? And if yes, are we going back to the roots of what Adam Smith said, meaning let every human being pursue their self-interest, and by pursuing the self-interest, you have market optimization? Or number two, we bring in a modicum of social capital, which is again what Corey said, that money without social endeavor is meaningless.
I'm a bit of both, in the sense that I think capitalism is changing because we don't really live in a capitalist society, right? Because we have too much government regulation. That's fine, because guess what? If we all were to play the game fair, and live in some Ayn Randian super world, then everybody wins. But we understand that there are bad actors, right? And there's a reason why capitalism, just like every other system, is bound to fail, because the people at the top change the rules instead of, just letting it be a fair game. But I think that startups, just like everything else, it's like selling a really hard startup or getting a crazy company like a Tesla off the ground. It's waves lapping against the beach will wear it away over time, in the sense that the shift of capital, the availability of capital in the ecosystem, whether it's through selling assets like these new NFTs, or more kind of banking 3.0, where there's more liquidity just broadly, I think that the market demand will drive innovation towards a more distributed capital play. Do I think that it's going to be the downfall of capitalism or the downfall of anything? Not particularly, because like anything else, greed not only is, greed is good, but greed adapts. The oil companies and the energy companies and the Rockefellers and everybody else, they're not going to go broke. They're not going to sit there twiddling their thumbs. They're just going to be late to the game in energy, right? In the same way that JP Morgan's never going to tell you that crypto works. And it's funny, there was that old where Jamie Dimon called Bitcoin a fraud. I was sitting in the room when he did that because of an investment banking conference. So the second he did that, I was like, oh, this is history. So I heard him say that. And it's like, now how many billions of dollars has JP Morgan invested in crypto and blockchain across the whole chain? It's like the Titans move in the same direction as everything else. They just happen to move slower. So
and the funny thing, I'm sorry, apropos.
Oh, go for it.
The funny thing about all these cryptos is that they're based, they're fiat currencies themselves. There's nothing fundamental to them.
Exactly. And the question is, do I trust the fiat that I know nobody controls, or do I trust the fiat that I know people control? I had a buddy who, in the whole election, and mind you, we won't go into politics, but what he said is, I just want to get back to good old fashioned slimy politicians. That's it. I just want my government corrupt as it used to be. I want everything boring, and I need to know there's a scandal and us to move on. And I think the same is kind of true in this kind of scenario, where it's people just want to know what the next step is so they can get in line, get working, and get building. But the thing that I think has changed in the market that no other market really has seen is the fear of the unknown, I think, is being whittled away day by day. And the example that I use is TikTok. So when TikTok first came out, it was weird videos that were creepy and all types of stuff. So I get it. Nobody wanted to go on it. But then all of this time later, there are now venture capitalists on TikTok, and there are venture capital communities on TikTok. So the days of judging a platform because it's silly or judging an idea because it's silly is, if it's like judging the radio saying it's not going to catch on. It's old school thinking. The market tells you where it goes. You don't tell the market where it goes.
Just because you don't understand it doesn't mean it's not all.
Exactly. I blew my buddy's brain the other day because I said, "You want to hear something funny?" And he goes, "What?" And I'm like, "Did you know that there's a new Bitcoin coming out tonight?" And he goes, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Well, 5 years from now, there's a small fringe group of people that are betting on something right now that's going to be worth 100x, and you could put in pennies today." And I said, "And you just don't know what it is."
Yeah.
That's it. You just aren't in on the secret. But it's there, and it's happening every day, every year, all over the world. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah, and again, I have to lean in on this. Like, it's happening everywhere.
Exactly. Oh, for us, I mean, given Miami is a weird place because it is international by definition.
Yeah.
There's too many people that speak Spanish and every other language, and there's too much connectivity to South America and Central America for there not to be. So a global world, I love that the globe is in my backyard. At least the Latin globe is in my backyard in this way. But the world is small and getting smaller every day, and opportunity can be found in all these crazy places. Just a question of, do you have the systems? Do you have teams? Do you have people that you can rely on? Because it takes, it's hard to build a house by yourself. Yeah, you can do it, but it's still really hard. It's much more efficient if you find people and can align interests and build teams and advisory boards and do all this stuff so that it's not just you rowing the boat.
Well, I'm excited for where you're at, and if your vision is to connect to LATAM, because the OAS is in no better position than ever now, and more needed than ever.
Yeah.
For us to survive competition across the oceans.
Absolutely.
So I have two questions to wrap this up because we're limited time here. First question is, I'm going to ask you your own question. So earlier you said you asked people, where the hell do you want to be? Because Argent is a little young, that's why I'm really curious. Like, what does Argent look like in a couple of years, in 10 years?
The mail room of the startup ecosystem globally. That's where I want us to be. I want us to be a startup planet where wherever you are and whoever you are, you can come and get good information and a good deal. Because people, whether you're putting money, whether you're putting time, everybody's trying to make sure they get a return on their investment, no matter what it is. And for me, it sounds so simple, but I tell our team all the time, we do two things. We do good deals with good people. That's it. That's all we do. And if we do those things all day long, then we can have any corporate document leaked and we're never going to be embarrassed. Right. So for me, where I look at, where Argent goes, it's Argent opens an angel group, Argent opens an incubator, Argent opens an accelerator, Argent opens a VC fund. And slowly but surely, Argent becomes a place where truly early stage companies, pre-seed, seed, and Series A, can find education, resources, mentorship, access to capital, and connectivity to the next phase. I think the biggest disservice that we do in the startup ecosystem is that we live in siloed rings of seed, pre-seed, non-focused, big city versus small city, instead of just going, we're on a timeline, and wherever you are, you might be benefiting because you're in a better ecosystem, and that's fine. But benefit extra there, do extra because you're there. Don't, do less with more in that way. So I think that I want the world to continue to become flatter. I want Argent to continue to become bigger, and I want us to be everywhere, and I want us to be helping the communities that actually need the help.
So yeah, one thing that Yorgo and I found over this last year of conversations with ecosystem builders all over the planet, and we made sure to talk to ecosystems of all different sizes and all different regions, and there's a single thread through all of it. And so we're just staying curious to try to inform maybe a way forward for everyone.
Yeah.
And it seems like you might have you're alluding, like we can infer your answer to this last question, but this is the final question: is what can the global collection of Startup Grind chapter directors in 125 countries like do for Aaron, for Argent?
Yeah, I think the two things I would say is, one, whatever you're doing in your community, just do 10% more of it first and foremost, because we need more community. Because I came to Miami, which is a really friendly place, and even I am a community builder in my own right, doing things, and that's good because it's good. I'm adding value, but it's bad because it's where was this before? Who was doing this before? So whatever you're doing in the startup world, as startup grind chapters and whatnot, there's still so much more to do. In terms of Argent, what I would say is we like helping, and we like helping in our domain. We don't want to go where, of course, we can't add value. We want to go and bring value. So if there are communities, if there are areas that need help with business planning, with financial strategy, with getting their startups to be capital raise ready, we hosted legitimately at noon today a Startup 101 for Kentucky. It's like we go where there's opportunity to educate and inform and bring value. So if your community needs it, if your community is looking for it, give us a call and we'll put a session on the board and we'll help out.
Great, cool. I look forward to connecting again in a little while. But this has been really, really helpful. Are there any last thoughts that you want to part on? Maybe also include how people can actually contact you.
Yeah, so if you're using, you can use the QR code that just goes to my LinkedIn. So feel free to say hello. We're available on argentstrategies.com, and we have easy ways to contact. The only thing I would share is really just a call to keep building. It's great to talk, but it's better to act. So the more we can do to keep building these bridges and connecting our communities, state to state, community to community, like we're not different. We just live different places. So let's act more like a community and less like these little armies, and we can probably do something great together.
I love that. That's a great way to end it. I really appreciate the generosity of your time.
Absolutely. Appreciate the invite. Thank you.
All right.
All right. We'll speak soon.